Good morning. It's Wednesday morning. That means it's Scott Ritter and Garland Nixon, and we got battlefield stuff to talk about, politics, you name it. Let's talk. Hello, Garland and Scott here, and I will give you the 30-second version real quick. Wednesday morning is my Rokfin exclusive show for subscribers. It certainly starts off on all channels. Rokfin is a platform that doesn't do censorship. Therefore, if they throw me off here, you can still find me on Rokfin. Rokfin doesn't charge anything. Rokfin has no advertisement, so it's a great free speech platform. However, if you choose, you can become a member of Rokfin, $14.99 a month. As again, if you can afford to support the channel, it's $14.99 a month. Or if you join for a year, they give you a couple months free. So it ends up to about 12 something a month, 12.40 or something a month, I think. At any rate, every Wednesday for subscribers, I do a show that Scott and I do, and I certainly appreciate that. But look, if you can't be a subscriber, if you can't afford that, that's fine. Just sign up for my Rokfin channel. Go over there, become a member. Costs nothing. You'll see absolutely everything other than just this one show, and you'll see the first few minutes of this. All right, Scott, let's talk battlefield. We've been talking about this on and on, counteroffensive, and this buildup. There's going to be a counteroffensive, and when the counteroffensive comes, big things are going to happen for Ukraine. Then there's they don't have weapons, they don't have people. So either one of two things: either this is all a bluff, that they're going to have a counteroffensive, and they're trying to convince the Russians that they don't have enough for it, so they can catch them by surprise. Or they're really in a world of hurt, and a counteroffensive would be suicide for a lot of people. Your thoughts on either or both scenarios, Scott Ritter?
Well, I've always been somewhat amused by attempts by the mainstream media or by Ukraine and its NATO allies to try and influence Russian decision making. The Russians are immune to it. They just simply don't care about any spin. They're reality based. So the idea that by publishing articles in the media, by having politicians debate about things in public, that's going to somehow get the Russians to go, oh, geez, because they said this, that's going to happen. No, the Russians are professionals. They do what I used to do, which is look at the facts, look at photographs, intercepts, etc., and build a realistic picture of, what Ukraine's capabilities are. I think if you listen to the Russians, they believe that at some point in time the Ukrainians will seek to carry out a counteroffensive. But the Russians say, or at least appear to be prepared for it, that they're not going to be taken by surprise. And, this isn't going to be a repeat of September, where the Ukrainians, assembled a considerable amount of force to hit areas where the Russians were ill prepared, and resulted in, the Russians having to retreat in precipitous fashion. The Russians are prepared now. They have not just a single line of defense, but a double line, a triple line, in some cases even more lines of defense. They have firepower that is superior to anything the Ukrainians can bring to bear, and they have ammunition. The reason why I bring up ammunition is that any offensive operation is going to require an extraordinary amount of ammunition on the part of the Ukrainians, artillery ammunition that they simply don't have. So I just am curious how this is going to unfold. I mean, the Russians, will have tracked ammunition supplies. They take photographs of the trains and the trucks and the warehouses, and which they then use to target. And they've been blowing up ammunition dumps and fuel dumps and all the logistical preparation that's been going on for some time now. So the Russians know that there's an ammunition shortage. So even if the Ukrainians were able to assemble, the 12 brigades that people are talking about, are these brigades capable of sustained offensive operation? The answer is no, not at all. And there's another problem for the Ukrainians: air defense. The Russians have been carrying out a very concerted, anti-air defense campaign for some time now, where they've succeeded in basically eroding, nullifying, neutralizing, eliminating Ukraine's ability to defend the airspace over the front edge of the battlefield, where, of course, any counteroffensive would be working. This means that any Ukrainian forces that assemble are going to be immediately targeted by Russian air power, for which Ukraine has no response. And what we've been seeing so far is that when the Ukrainians do gather forces, concentrate forces in the forward edge of the battle area, the Russians are hitting them with precision-guided air-delivered munitions, and the casualties are significant. So when I factor all this in, even if Ukraine was to carry out a counteroffensive at this point in time, it has zero chance of success. But the fact is, even the Ukrainians are acknowledging that many of these brigades that people are talking about exist on paper only. The equipment isn't there, that's not ready. The troops aren't there. And you hear some Ukrainian officials talk about the need to postpone any meaningful counteroffensive until after the July gathering of NATO, the NATO summit in July, where Ukraine will make a desperate plea for more equipment it has to have before it can even begin to do this. I mean, Zelensky said it himself: if we don't challenge the Russian Air Force, we can't win. And right now, the Russian Air Force is unchallenged. The Ukrainians don't have anything that can challenge the Russian Air Force. That's why they're desperate for F-16s, under the belief that somehow by providing F-16s, Ukraine will be able to tip the scale. But it's not just the aircraft itself. I mean, Zelensky's saying, I want all your F-16s, pretty much. It's not just one or two. I want them all. He wants it's what we talked. I think we joked about it last fall when Zaluzhny said, at the Ramstein contact group, yeah, I can beat these guys. I can do it. But first, I need 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighter vehicles, 1,000 artillery pieces, unlimited ammunition, da-da-da. What he needed was an army. I mean, Garland, I can beat anybody if you give me an army capable of beating them. But there's the important thing. How do you get that army? And Ukraine right now is incapable of assembling that army. They're professional forces. And this is the Ukrainian generals saying this straight up. Some of their units have suffered 80% casualties. And these are personnel that took years to train, equip. Now they're being replaced by people, even if they're motivated people, they're untrained, which means they can't operate at the levels that are necessary for effective combat operations on the front line. The U.S. is talking about training them in combined arms warfare. I mean, here we had Admiral Kirby, who knows nothing about combined arms warfare, talking about it as he briefs people. I used to do it. The battalion I was involved in, we trained hard for 2 years before we got to the point where we said, yeah, we can do this. But if we took any time off from our training, our capabilities went down to about zero. The Ukrainians are being trained in weeks. You can't even learn the basics of joint fires, joint maneuver in that period of time. They're being equipped with modern equipment that they're just not ready to handle. So we're giving them equipment they don't know how to use. We're putting them in a operational mode, combined arms warfare, that they're not prepared to execute, and they're going up against a Russian force that has been digging in for months, waiting for this attack. This is what we're seeing is the beginning of the end. We might even be in the middle of the end, but when this is all said and done, if the Ukrainians go forward and sacrifice these troops, we will be in collapse mode. And I think we're going to be seeing that sometime this summer.
Um, and the thing about it, also, looking at the Ukrainian, but if in fact what we've been hearing for some time, and it makes sense, is correct, that there is a shortage of ammunition. If you do go on an offensive and you use up, here's the other part. If you punch yourself out, you go into this so-called offensive, and you stored up all of this information, I mean, all of this ammunition and all of these things. You say, okay, we're going to let the Russians have it all at once. And you go and, man, you just expend ammunition. And let's say you take a few towns. Let's say you have some limited success, whatever, right? Let's say you have no success. How do you hold, even if you took some towns, you're now out of ammunition. How do you hold them? As you know about, I know about self-defense, you are most vulnerable when you swing. If I swing at you and I miss, look at that. There's nothing. You're whap. I'm gonna get knocked out. I'm gonna get my arm broke. All kind of terrible things are gonna happen when you swing and miss. And even if you swing and connect. So if they do this with a short of ammunition at the conclusion of this offensive, they're out of ammunition. A, they can't protect themselves if the Russian want to counterattack their lines and overrun them. And B, if they take some towns, how do you defend what you've taken with no ammunition? Scott, how do you go into the summer having expended 80% of your ammunition in 1 week for an offensive?
No, it's unsustainable. I mean, that's the bottom line. Is there's literally, look, there's the possibility that Ukraine has been lying to the media, setting us up. But again, okay, so they launched the counteroffensive, and Garland, you and I go, oh my goodness, we were fooled. And what does that do to change ground truth on the battlefield? Nothing. You know who wasn't fooled? The Russians. They know full well what's coming to them. Nothing's going to take them by surprise. They got the Ukrainians wired for intelligence. So you and I and everybody else are out there, we're speculating that, and it's well-intentioned. I mean, I'm not trying to fool anybody, and I don't think you're trying to fool anybody. We're wrestling with a very complex issue, thousands of miles away from the front line, with absolutely inadequate and incomplete data. And we're trying to, connect dots. And it's like getting a puzzle, a 1,000-piece puzzle, and they throw it on the table, and you and I have 75 pieces. And people are going, well, what is it? What is it? And we're like, just a minute. We're trying to figure it out with 75 pieces, 1,000-piece puzzle. And then when we get it wrong, they go, you're an idiot. And I know, gosh, if I had more pieces, I might have been able to see something. But so we're looking at this puzzle, 75 pieces, and we're doing our best. We're trying. And I think we're doing okay. We're doing all right. But the Russians, meanwhile, they're not going to listen to guys looking at 75 pieces. The Russian intelligence people are going to be saying, hey, let's collect more pieces. But they're going to collect it in ways that you and I aren't aware of. That's what the intelligence business does. And they're going to have, say, 800 pieces. And they're going to put that together, and they're going to say, we have a more full picture about what's going on. But their job isn't to inform me. Their job's not to inform you. Their job is just to win on the battlefield, which they're doing, by the way. So we're in a difficult position where we're being asked to, make do analysis, make assessments, make predictions, and we try. And I think we've done a good job of being right on. But we are prisoner to the data that's made available publicly. And if a major provider of this data is doing it in a manner designed to disinform, then we could get caught up in that. But the Russians aren't. And that's my point. Where you and I can sit here and say, we don't think this is going to happen because this, that, and the other thing. If we're operating on corrupted data, our conclusions might be wrong. But you know whose data is not corrupted? Russia. They know what's going on, and they're just going to be ready for it. And everything points to the fact that Ukraine is not going to be able to pull this off, and that Ukraine is running out of everything, and that Russia isn't, and that Russia is going to prevail on the battlefield, and that this war will, and I'll just say it again, I think this war is over by the end of summer, early fall. And more and more people are coming out and saying that, more and more analysts. Now, again, they could just be fooling us, but I don't think they are. I think the growing consensus is that Ukraine cannot sustain this fight. That again, to paraphrase General Cavoli, the U.S. Commander of Forces in Europe, the scope and scale of the violence taking place in eastern Ukraine is beyond the imagination of anything NATO could ever have imagined. That's what he said. That's a quote. He couldn't imagine it, which means the West isn't prepared for this fight, and neither is Ukraine. You know who is prepared for it? Russia.
Poland. Recently, I've read a couple of things about Poland. We're always reading about Poland. Poland's going to enter the war. Poland, the U.S. is going to throw Poland in there next. And I look at the size and the firepower in Poland's army, and I'm like, well, that wouldn't even. I mean, they couldn't have stood up to the Ukraine army for a couple of hours, much less go up against the Russian army. And then I read that the Poles are now they're making disparaging marks about the Germans, and they're doing exercises, military exercises on their border, their western border, basically kind of implying that they're ready to go to war with Germany. The Poles are a bit of a mess. Your thoughts on where they fit in, and all of these people that are saying, "Oh, the Poles, they're going to come marching in next, and they're ready to fight." Doesn't make sense to me. But your thoughts, Scott?
For a nation that is little more than a flat plain that has served as the territory across which armies march for centuries, Poland sure is behaving pretty stupid. They haven't learned anything from their history. The Poles don't win wars. The Poles lose wars. The Poles get trapped between two superior forces, and then the Poles pay the price. Now, in the aftermath of the Second World War, we were supposed to be building a better post-world environment to avoid that kind of conflict, but we got caught up in the Cold War, and Poland once again found itself, in a situation where it's a frontline state. Had there been a conflict between NATO and the Soviet Union, Poland would have once again felt the brunt of that war. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the potential of Europe to emerge, free of the weight of that history, one would have thought that Poland's goals and objectives should be to become a piece of connectivity between Europe and Russia, Eurasia. Promoting economic prosperity, economic connectivity, peaceful coexistence and things of that nature, because that could have been Poland's strength. They could have been this wonderful nation that brought Europe and the Russian Eurasian hinterland together. And Poland could have been positioned itself to be the power, at least from a political and economic perspective that it wanted to be. Stay away from the military would have been my advice to Poland, because you don't historically do well on that one, because nobody likes you. Make everybody like you by being the people that facilitate contact. But here we have the Poles falling into what I call Ukraine syndrome. You see, the Ukrainians, especially after the Russians invaded, but especially, I guess we can go back to 2008 when we tried to make them feel special by saying you're going to be invited to NATO. They have assumed a stance that says we are the center of the universe. Ukraine is the center of the universe. Not only is there this historical and cultural revisionism where they're going back and rewriting history to say that Ukraine is the greatest force on the earth, everything came from Ukraine. God came from Ukraine. Jesus was a Ukrainian. So was Muhammad. So was Buddha, apparently. Everybody's a Ukrainian because Ukraine is the greatest place on the earth. With the finest people, and the world revolves around Ukraine, and everybody should do what Ukraine wants. Well, that's just what happens when a drug addict gets ample supply of narcotics. He gets shot up, he sits in the corner, and he hallucinates. And that's what Ukraine's doing, hallucinate right now. They're high on Western money, they're high on Western attention, they're high on Western military equipment. But when you cut it off, all you have is an addict going through withdrawals, and that's the future of Ukraine. if they survive. Poland should be looking at saying, we don't want to do that. But instead, what do we get? The Poles are starting to view themselves as the center of the universe. My God, the Poles making trouble with Germany. Simply read history. It doesn't work out for you, Poland. You never win, and you never will win. And now they're talking tough against Russia, and they're talking about total historical, meltdown. They're talking about erasing the border between Poland and Western Ukraine, and absorbing Western Ukraine as some sort of confederation. Volin, 1943, 1944. Do the Poles not know what happens when Polish subhumans, because that's how the Western Ukrainians view Poland. You're subhuman. You ain't Ukrainian. You're subhuman. And the last time they got together like this, 110,000 Polish women, children, and old men were slaughtered by the Western Ukrainians, by the Banderists. Poland is just living in a fantasy world that's so removed from reality, it's not even funny. But reality will come crashing down, because the United States is going to abandon Ukraine very soon, by the way. So is Europe. And Poland is going to be left holding this bag, and realizing that, it's like going trick-or-treating the day after Halloween. Ain't no one putting that candy in the bag. It's over.
Well, Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter here. As I let everyone know, this is my Rokfin show for subscribers on every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. We're going to go over to Rokfin right now, and it will be for my subscriber show. I do like to get started off so everybody can see part of the show. Rokfin is a free speech platform. It doesn't censor. They don't have advertisements over there. It's absolutely fantastic. Lots of great shows. You can look around on Rokfin if you can afford it. Become a subscriber on Rokfin. It's $14.99 a month. And if you sign up for a year, it comes to like $12.40. They give you a couple months free. However, you don't have to subscribe. You can go there and you can be a member of that on that free speech platform. You can be a member of my show at no charge. You will see everything with the exception of this one subscriber only show. So go to Rokfin in case they toss me off of YouTube, rokfin.com/Garland Nixon. Thanks a lot. All righty. We're jumping off.